August 17, 1943, 25,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. 14:17 hours. The Luftwaffe fighter controllers stopped counting at Bomber Formation 16, overwhelmed by the density of American heavy bombers filling German radar screens in formations that shouldn't exist in daylight skies. Major Hans Joachim Hermann, commanding Jagdgeschwader 300 night fighters, hastily converted to day operations and architect of Germany's nighttime air defense network, sat in his headquarters staring at a tactical display showing what appeared to be a mistake. 376 American B-17 flying fortresses approaching industrial targets in broad daylight, flying in box formations so tight and so heavily armed that standard Luftwaffe fighter tactics, developed against British night bombers and dispersed Soviet formations, were tactically useless. What Hermann didn't know was that he was witnessing the culmination of an American strategic bombing doctrine that German air defense planners had dismissed as suicidal, a doctrine that would force Germany to defend its industrial heartland in daylight against an enemy that attacked with mathematical precision, overwhelming firepower, and industrial capacity that made attrition irrelevant. The Americans weren't bombing under the cover of darkness like sensible air forces. They were bombing in daylight, in formation, and daring Germany to stop them. The Daylight Precision Bombing Campaign, a strategy Luftwaffe commanders had called impossible to sustain and British Bomber Command had abandoned as too costly. But between 1943 and 1945, the American 8th Air Force executed 750 major daylight raids over Germany, dropped 692,918 tons of bombs on targets selected for maximum industrial disruption, and forced Germany to divert resources from ground combat to air defense at ratios that made battlefield victory impossible. And it started with a doctrinal decision that seemed insane: attack in daylight, accept casualties, and rely on defensive firepower and tight formation discipline to survive what no other air force had survived. The story begins not with the B-17, but with a fundamental disagreement between American and British strategic bombing doctrine. 1940. RAF Bomber Command Headquarters, High Wycombe, England. The Royal Air Force, attempting to strike German industrial targets through precision daylight bombing, discovered that precision was impossible and daylight was suicidal. RAF bombers attacking German targets in 1940 faced aggressive fighter opposition, accurate anti-aircraft fire, and navigation challenges that made hitting specific factories or rail yards nearly impossible. Loss rates exceeded 5% per mission, unsustainable for sustained operations. By late 1940, RAF Bomber Command had transitioned to night bombing, accepting reduced accuracy in exchange for reduced casualties. British night bombing doctrine emphasized area attacks, drop incendiary and high-explosive bombs across entire city districts, destroying housing, factories, and infrastructure without attempting to hit specific installations. The strategy worked as attrition warfare, destroying German industrial capacity gradually through cumulative damage to urban areas, but it abandoned any pretense of precision. Bombs fell on residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, and industrial zones indiscriminately. American air doctrine rejected this approach. The U.S. Army Air Forces, developing strategic bombing theory through the 1930s at the Air Corps Tactical School, believed that industrial economies had critical vulnerabilities, specific factories, power plants, and transportation nodes, whose destruction would cascade through the entire economic system. Destroying ball bearing factories would ground aircraft. Destroying synthetic oil refineries would immobilize armored forces. Destroying rail marshalling yards would prevent raw materials from reaching factories. But exploiting these vulnerabilities required precision bombing, hitting specific buildings from high altitude in daylight conditions where targets could be identified visually. And precision bombing required surviving German air defenses long enough to reach targets, hold formation during bombing runs, and return to bases in England. The British insisted this was impossible. RAF experience demonstrated that daylight bombing raids suffered catastrophic casualties against German fighters in flak. American bombers would face the same defenses. The Americans would discover, as the British had, that daylight precision bombing was a theoretical concept that couldn't survive contact with German air defenses. American air commanders disagreed. The B-17 Flying Fortress, they argued, was fundamentally different from British bombers. The B-17 carried 13 50-caliber machine guns, more defensive armament than any bomber in existence. Flying in tight box formations, B-17s could create overlapping fields of fire that would destroy German fighters attempting standard attack profiles. The Norden bomb sight, coupled with high-altitude bombing from 25,000 feet, would enable precision strikes against specific buildings. And American industrial capacity could replace losses at rates that made tactical attrition acceptable if strategic objectives were achieved. British Bomber Command remained skeptical, but the American 8th Air Force, established in England in 1942 under the command of General Ira Eaker, prepared to test daylight precision bombing doctrine under combat conditions. The first missions were small-scale tests. On August 17, 1942, 12 B-17s attacked the Rouen-Sotteville rail yards in occupied France. The raid was barely opposed. German fighters appeared briefly but didn't press attacks against the heavily armed bombers. All 12 B-17s returned safely. American air commanders declared the mission proof that daylight bombing was viable. The British remained unconvinced. A dozen bombers attacking a lightly defended target in France proved nothing about whether large formations could penetrate German air defenses over industrial targets in Germany proper. The real test would come when hundreds of bombers attacked targets defended by concentrated fighter forces and dense flak. That test came in 1943 as the 8th Air Force built strength and began attacking targets deep in German territory. The doctrine that emerged was mathematically elegant and tactically brutal. B-17 formations would fly in combat boxes, 54 aircraft formations arranged in staggered altitudes and positions that created interlocking fields of defensive fire. Each B-17 carried 13 50-caliber machine guns positioned to cover different approach angles. A fighter attacking from the front faced fire from the nose guns of every bomber in the formation. A fighter attacking from below faced fire from ball turret gunners. A fighter attacking from astern faced fire from tail gunners. The defensive firepower was overwhelming. A 54-aircraft combat box could put approximately 700 machine guns into the air simultaneously. German fighters attempting to penetrate these formations faced concentrated fire from dozens of guns. The theoretical kill zone around each combat box extended approximately 1,000 yards. Any fighter entering that envelope faced saturation fire that made survival unlikely. But the doctrine had a critical vulnerability. It depended on maintaining tight formation. If bombers scattered, if pilots broke formation to evade attacking fighters or flak, the defensive firepower dispersed and individual bombers became vulnerable. Formation discipline was the difference between survivability and annihilation. The Luftwaffe tested American formation discipline repeatedly. Early 1943 raids faced increasingly aggressive fighter attacks. German fighter tactics evolved to exploit any weakness in American formation integrity. Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters attacked from head-on at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, giving bomber gunners less than 3 seconds to engage before the fighters passed through the formation. Messerschmitt Bf-109s attacked from high altitude, diving through formations at speeds that made tracking difficult. Twin-engine Bf-110s armed with rockets attacked from beyond machine gun range, launching rockets into formations hoping to create enough damage to make bombers break formation. American losses mounted. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid on August 17, 1943, 1 year after the first test mission, demonstrated both strategic potential and tactical cost of daylight bombing. 376 B-17s attacked ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt and aircraft factories at Regensburg. The raids destroyed approximately 40% of German ball bearing production capacity and damaged significant aircraft manufacturing. But 60 B-17s were shot down and 168 returned with battle damage. The loss rate, 16%, was catastrophic, far exceeding sustainable attrition levels. A second Schweinfurt raid on October 14, 1943, produced similar results: strategic success, tactical disaster. Of 291 bombers dispatched, 77 were shot down and 121 damaged. Loss rate, 26%. At those casualty rates, bomber crews had virtually no statistical chance of surviving the required 25-mission combat tour.
8th Air Force faced an existential crisis. The daylight bombing campaign was achieving strategic objectives, destroying German industrial capacity, but at casualty rates that would exhaust available crews and aircraft within months. British predictions appeared correct. Daylight bombing was unsustainable. American air commanders faced a choice: abandon daylight operations and adopt British night bombing methods, or find a way to reduce losses while maintaining operational tempo. The solution came from an unexpected source: fighters. The P-51 Mustang, originally designed as a ground attack aircraft, became the weapon that made daylight bombing sustainable. Equipped with drop tanks extending range beyond 1,000 miles, P-51s could escort bomber formations all the way to targets deep in Germany and engage Luftwaffe fighters attempting to intercept bombers. The psychological and tactical impact was transformative. German fighters accustomed to attacking bombers during the period when American fighters couldn't reach German airspace suddenly faced American fighters throughout the entire mission profile. The effect on German fighter tactics was immediate. Luftwaffe formations that had attacked bomber streams aggressively now had to disengage when American fighters appeared. German pilots who had developed tactics specifically for attacking unescorted bombers faced fighter versus fighter combat where American numerical superiority and P-51 performance advantages made attrition unsustainable. By spring 1944, American bomber losses had declined from 5 to 7% per mission to 2 to 3%, still significant but sustainable. The combination of heavy bomber defensive firepower, tight formation discipline, and long-range fighter escort created a system that German air defenses couldn't counter effectively. But the strategic impact extended beyond forcing Germany to defend its airspace. German air defense consumed resources at rates that starved other military requirements. By 1944, Germany allocated approximately 70% of fighter production to defending the homeland rather than supporting ground forces or attacking Allied shipping. More critically, Germany diverted tens of thousands of anti-aircraft guns, primarily the legendary 88mm gun effective against both aircraft and tanks, to defend cities and factories rather than supporting ground forces facing Allied and Soviet advances. The resource allocation was devastating. Each 88 flak battery deployed in Germany was one less battery available to panzer divisions facing Soviet armor. Each fighter squadron defending industrial targets was one less squadron supporting Wehrmacht ground operations. The daylight bombing campaign forced Germany to choose between defending its industrial capacity and supporting its ground forces. Germany chose to defend industry, accepting that ground forces would operate without adequate air support. The strategic bombing survey conducted after the war quantified the impact. German military production, despite strategic bombing, increased throughout 1943 and into early 1944, a testament to German industrial efficiency and dispersal strategies. But production levels were 20 to 30% below what German planners projected without strategic bombing. More critically, specific bottlenecks created by precision attacks cascaded through the entire military production system. The ball bearing raids demonstrated this principle. Germany produced approximately 9 million ball bearings monthly before the Schweinfurt raids. Ball bearings were critical components in virtually all mechanized equipment, aircraft engines, tank transmissions, and truck axles. The August and October 1943 raids destroyed production capacity, reducing output to 6.5 million units monthly. German stockpiles prevented immediate shortages, but by mid-1944, ball bearing scarcity was limiting production of tanks, aircraft, and vehicles. The synthetic fuel campaign produced even more significant effects. Germany, lacking natural petroleum reserves, relied on synthetic fuel produced through coal hydrogenation at approximately 25 plants. Destroying these plants would cripple German mechanized forces. American 8th Air Force and RAF Bomber Command, coordinating attacks, systematically targeted synthetic fuel production beginning in May 1944. The results were catastrophic for German operations. Synthetic fuel production dropped from 316,000 tons in March 1944 to 107,000 tons in June 1944, a 66% reduction. By September 1944, production had collapsed to 17,000 tons monthly. Panzer divisions, Luftwaffe fighter units, and naval vessels faced critical fuel shortages that limited operations, regardless of equipment availability or tactical situation. The psychological impact on German forces was equally significant. German soldiers and civilians experienced strategic bombing as relentless, inescapable, and overwhelming. Air raid sirens became the soundtrack of German daily life. Cities burned repeatedly. Factory workers commuted to plants that might not exist tomorrow. The experience created cumulative stress that degraded morale, reduced productivity, and generated pervasive fatalism. German air defense fighters faced similar psychological attrition. Luftwaffe pilots, initially confident in their superior training and aircraft performance, discovered that American industrial capacity made individual victories meaningless. A German pilot might shoot down multiple bombers and still watch hundreds more continue toward their targets. The psychological toll of fighting an enemy that replaced losses faster than they could be inflicted was devastating to German pilot morale. Post-war interrogations of German fighter pilots revealed consistent patterns. Pilots described the bomber formations as walls of metal that appeared indestructible despite individual bombers falling. They described the experience of attacking formations knowing that survival depended on avoiding the concentrated defensive fire that had killed hundreds of their comrades. And they described the hopelessness of watching American formations continue operations despite the Luftwaffe inflicting casualties that would have stopped any other air force. The doctrinal lesson was that industrial warfare was fundamentally about capacity rather than capability. German fighters were technically superior to B-17s in individual performance. German anti-aircraft artillery was more accurate than Allied equivalents. German pilots were initially better trained than American crews. But none of these advantages mattered when American industrial capacity could produce bombers faster than Germany could shoot them down, train replacement crews faster than Germany could kill experienced pilots, and manufacture ammunition faster than Germany could expend it. The mathematics was brutal. In 1944, American aircraft factories produced approximately 96,000 aircraft, including 16,000 heavy bombers. German factories produced approximately 40,000 aircraft in total. American training programs graduated approximately 80,000 pilots. German programs graduated approximately 15,000. American industrial capacity produced war material at rates that made tactical effectiveness secondary to operational persistence. The strategic bombing campaign exemplified this principle. The American 8th Air Force could sustain 5% loss rates indefinitely because replacement aircraft and crews arrived faster than attrition occurred. Germany couldn't sustain equivalent loss rates because production and training capacity couldn't replace losses. The side with superior industrial capacity could accept attrition that would be catastrophic for the side with limited capacity. By 1945, German air defense had effectively collapsed, not because Luftwaffe fighters stopped flying or anti-aircraft guns stopped firing, but because German industrial capacity couldn't sustain operations. Fighter units operated with reduced sortie rates due to fuel shortages. Anti-aircraft batteries rationed ammunition. Replacement aircraft and pilots arrived in quantities inadequate to offset losses. The German air defense system, which had inflicted devastating casualties on American bomber formations in 1943, was a hollow shell by early 1945, still dangerous but no longer capable of preventing American bombers from attacking any target in Germany with virtual impunity. The final strategic bombing missions demonstrated this collapse. In March 1945, the American 8th Air Force dispatched over 1,200 heavy bombers against German targets on a single day. German fighter opposition was minimal. Flak remained dangerous but couldn't prevent attacks. American loss rates dropped below 1% despite attacking heavily defended targets. The American daylight bombing strategy that Germany never found an answer for succeeded not because of tactical superiority, but because of industrial asymmetry. German air defenses were tactically effective. They shot down thousands of American bombers and killed tens of thousands of American airmen. But tactical effectiveness couldn't overcome strategic inadequacy. Germany couldn't replace losses, couldn't sustain operations, and couldn't prevent American bombers from systematically destroying the industrial capacity that German forces depended upon. The British had been correct that daylight bombing in 1940 to 1942 was unsustainable, but they were wrong that it would remain unsustainable. American industrial capacity, combined with tactical innovations like long-range fighter escorts and formation defensive firepower, created a system that could absorb casualties and continue operations indefinitely. The Germans prepared for night raids because that was what rational air forces did, attack when defensive advantages were minimized. America arrived in daylight because American industrial capacity made sustainability a function of production rates rather than loss rates. German defenses couldn't stop an enemy that treated aircraft as ammunition. In aviation museums today, B-17 flying fortresses sit preserved as symbols of American air power. Museum placards describe their defensive armament, their formation tactics, and their role in defeating Germany. Tour guides explain how crews flew 25 mission combat tours, facing German fighters and flak. The narrative emphasizes heroism, courage, and sacrifice. What museum placards often omit is that strategic bombing succeeded because American industry produced bombers faster than Germany could destroy them. The heroism was real, the courage was real, and the sacrifice was real.
But the outcome was determined by production capacity rather than individual valor. Wars are won by nations that can sustain losses, not nations that inflict them. Major Hans Joachim Hermann, watching American bomber formations fill German radar screens in densely packed combat boxes that German fighters couldn't penetrate with catastrophic casualties, learned what German strategic planners refused to accept. You can't defend against an enemy with unlimited resources using limited resources. German air defenses killed 12,000 American heavy bombers, a staggering number representing tremendous tactical success. But American factories built 35,000 heavy bombers, making tactical success strategically irrelevant. The bombing strategy Germany never found an answer for wasn't a tactical innovation or technological breakthrough. It was industrial capacity applied relentlessly until German defenses collapsed under cumulative attrition they couldn't sustain. The formations so dense they rewrote air warfare forever succeeded because behind each formation destroyed, 10 more were being built in American factories that German forces couldn't reach and couldn't stop.
79 years after the Schweinfurt raids, the principle remains valid. Industrial capacity determines sustainable operational tempo. The side that can replace losses indefinitely can accept tactical attrition that would be catastrophic for the side with limited replacement capacity. Strategic bombing didn't defeat Germany by destroying its industrial capacity. German production remained significant until the war's end. Strategic bombing defeated Germany by forcing resource allocation choices that starved ground forces of support, while American industrial capacity supported ground forces, air forces, and sustained strategic bombing simultaneously. They laughed at American bombers arriving in daylight when sensible air forces bombed at night. Then German factories burned, German fuel production collapsed, and German ground forces fought without air support or adequate fuel, while American formations continued appearing in daylight, in formation, daring Germany to stop them with resources Germany didn't have. Sometimes the answer isn't tactical brilliance. Sometimes it's showing up with more bombers than the enemy has bullets. The Americans understood this. The Germans never did. That's why American bombers overran Europe in broad daylight, while German air defenses, successful tactically but inadequate strategically, watched industrial capacity defeat tactical skill. The strategy Germany never answered was production capacity applied until answering became impossible.